Hey, Mark. Morning.
Hi, Eric. It's interesting that you're like the first one to join so far today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I
And
don't know what's going on. I was about to email the mailing list and say, did I get the meeting invite wrong, or is there some sort of a
no, I'm in it. As far
right?
as I know, you're
Clearly,
in it.
you just disproved my hypothesis.
Yep. Sorry, I missed the last two. I had yeah, Mike Burcell and I had we see Brian's joining. Um, had a round table and a lot of stuff going on with that. It's just been crazy. Went to the doctors yesterday and I got some little touch of pneumonia right now. So,
Oh, sorry to hear that. That
happens.
doesn't sound good.
It is not fun, I will say that.
Yeah. Mm. Okay. Well, just gonna give people 2 more minutes to join, and then we'll jump into it. We'll make whatever progress we can with what we got.
Okay.
My cat's been meowing nonstop for the last few days. I do not know why, but
Being very vocal or
I don't know what's going on with him, but you may hear some of that in the background. He's very insistent for attention.
that's no problem. Mine lately has been doing the same.
All right, we got more. We got
Perfect.
more people uh, online watching the document than we have online.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. We're gonna put minutes in the chat. Oh, hi Manu. Finally, we got some attendance. Today it's really
Wonderful.
slow starting.
Yeah. Good morning, Manu.
Good morning, guys. Uh, I'm on the same time zone you are, Mark. I'm traveling this morning, so I
Oh,
will
where are
stay muted
you?
a little
Are
bit.
you
I
in
need, I need
are
a
you
cup
in
of
Silicon
coffee.
Valley somewhere?
Yes,
Bay
I'm in
Area?
Santa Clara. Yeah. Yeah.
I see.
So I'll grab a cup of coffee. I'll be right back.
Okay.
But I can hear you guys.
All right, awesome.
Perfect.
So I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Okay. So let's see. Hi, Manu. Okay. So a few things I wanted to discuss today. One was the IETF 124 contribution. Unfortunately, without Hank or Thomas here, I don't think this is something I want to do. I will reach out to them, offline, I guess, and see what they have for us. Separately, I want to make some progress on the reference architecture because there were some changes. I was looking over the document. We haven't looked at it for a while. And, I have a few thoughts and perhaps suggestions. And there are some things we can decide on in short order. And finally, anything you guys want to discuss, we can talk about. So let me jump into this. So the first thing I was hoping to get to, which is something that we should at least have a draft around, is this. It's just something I feel that it's a self-contained work item that we can just knock off. So the entity relationship diagram between the different terms we have. Hi, Shalini. Okay, remind me if I've seen you in these meetings before. If not, perhaps introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm joining this meeting for the first time, actually.
Okay. Are you with any company or you by yourself?
Yeah, I work for Qualcomm and we recently joined the CCC. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Very welcome.
Welcome, Shalini.
So first, so we have, if you look in the chat, I don't know if you can see messages from before you joined, but there is a meeting minutes document that basically talks like one of the things that we do is we keep a record of who attended which meeting. So I'm going to add you this time. My cat is meowing incessantly. I don't know how much of that my microphone is picking up today, and I don't know what's going on. So I apologize for the constant interruption. If need be, I'll kick him out. But we'll see. Okay, and the first thing I wanted to hope to accomplish today would be the keep monitoring meetings and the here. Okay. All right, is the entity relationship diagram. So basically going between workload and workload credential, and I can draw this in some sort of graphic tool, but before I do and spend the time, I just wanted to see, you know, this is probably not a correct draft that I have over here, but I wanted to hear any critiques. So the thought was, we have this concept of, I don't know, workload. Like workload, as Whimsy talks about it, which we should align to, executes to relates to a deployed instance of software. So really, what I see here by workload instance is what Whimsy calls workload. So this is one of the first things I would change, right? Or
So
maybe we call the first thing workload template or workload source material.
So what you mean by workload instance is one T, right, on one platform running a certain executable.
Or yeah, so for instance, I may be doing horizontal scale out. So I launch multiple workload instances that, oh, hi, Hank. Yeah, so Hank, we're working on just trying to figure out the entity relationship diagram here, so we at least know for the future, how different terms that we work with, may relate to each other, and that's just something I wanted to just get done as a self-contained item, so we can move on from it. And before the meeting is over, Hank, since you're here, I want to talk about again our contribution to IETF 124. If you remember, I put out this document called the TWI Enterprise Business Case. Again, I'm gonna drop these links in the. So this is enterprise use case for TWI, and this other document that I authored following our discussion last week is specifically what TWI and RATS intersection might mean. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open my I'm going to open my Gmail, and this is where I get notifications if anyone wants to get access to anything, and I'll grant access promptly. So far, nothing. Okay, so yeah. Anyway, so those are the things I want to discuss with you, Hank, before the meeting wraps up. But right now, since we already got started, in the reference architecture, we have this entity relationship diagram, and I want to make sure we understand how the different concepts relate to each other. So, and maybe we'll need to define new terms. So clearly, there is a concept of a workload. So workload is instance of software executing for a particular purpose. So that this is what I really mean here, right?
So
the workload basically is a static starter image or a composer thing. That is something you can sign and stash, I assume, in the workload. Or encrypt, for example,
well,
right?
So that is workload runs. That's what I'm like.
No.
It's executing.
Really?
Yes.
No, workload instant runs, I think.
Well, okay, so if I go and find the whimsy definition of workload, which is what I'm trying to align to, so we don't have to do
Yeah.
too many translations, I believe to whimsy, a workload is an instance of software executing for a particular purpose. So there isn't a workload that's not executing is not a workload.
Okay, so the workload I see here, where the cursor is blinking in the line, is literally the instance of a workload. And then
Yes,
there's
that's
a
why.
workload instance, another. I don't get that already. So workload, I assumed, is the thing that you acquire from the outside. Typically, they can be encrypted. It's just a starting, and the state machine is the starting point, and then you instantiate it manifolds. That's why it says one to many, I thought. When I was looking at this, I immediately thought the workload is relatively static and can be signed, for example, or encrypted. And then you instantiate it, and it becomes a workload parenthesis instance.
Okay,
But
so
that's wrong, right?
that's the thing you're describing. I would put here on the left. So I'm gonna just give it a
Ah,
name right now, like a workload template or something. That's
yeah,
something from which you can instantiate a workload, but it's not executing.
exactly. Yeah, wonderful.
Okay,
Okay,
so
because
let me
it
just
is easy
clarify it right
stuff.
now. So I'm just gonna hit not executing. So some sort of a static,
Mm-hmm.
it's a static, not executing thing. Work
Yeah.
instance is executing. That's what's interesting about it, is that it, right? And this is where I'm saying from one workload template, you can instantiate multiple workload instances. So like that's your typical horizontal scale out.
So question. Are we, when we talk among ourselves, are we going to use the word instance? Are we going to use the word workload in your notation there?
So I think that we're going to align to the whimsy definition, where the shorthand workload will refer to an instance of an executing workload.
Okay.
It's just again, so that I do not want to have sort of a DDD translation layer between that and whimsy. It's just, it seems like it's going to complicate things. So then I'm basically saying that how many identities can a workload have?
So now you're talking workload template or workload instance? That's what we're talking
So
about.
the temp, like, so the idea is, unless you're executing, you cannot have an identity. You're just a template. In fact, if I start from the same template, like same image, and I give it different configurations, it might very well have different identities because it might be doing different things.
Yes.
Right.
There will
So
be customization around that.
Well,
and then
actually, the template itself has an identity as a template identity, and then the instances together in our world have one identity that's shared across all the workload instances, and that it may or may not be separate from the.
in your case, that may very well be, but let me motivate how it not necessarily so. So if I do horizontal scale out, right? So I went and started a bunch of instances from the same image, right? If all of these instances can get access to the same credential, so same secret key, same certificate, then there would be a one-to-one relationship in that case, because there is like one like they're indistinguishable from each other. However, if each workload generates its own key and then gets it certified, then each of them are actually going to have different credential instances, maybe with different lifetimes. Okay, so and we need to be general enough to encompass all these different cases. So I am now thinking, I want to also capture the following. So now we can have one workload template can have many workload instances. So I think we agree on that. Now, once we have a workload instance, how many identities can it have? So here I say one-on-one. I actually don't believe that. I actually think it's one-to-many, because if a workload is trying to do different things, then it may very well be given different identities. So I propose that this becomes one-to-many.
Explain what you mean by a workload. Multiple
instance
doing different things.
Well, so okay, let me explain. So I have a workload, And it presents at the least the following two identities. It presents one identity to somebody who wants to authenticate to it. So if I want to talk to you and it says, I'm Bob. And that's very well because somebody might want to talk to Bob. And then this same workload instance, when it talks to some sort of backend, may very well be Mary for purposes of that. There's no reason to constrain it to have one identity for both of those interactions because they may very well have very different privileges.
Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting piece of conversation because I think the difference in our world, in our perspective, is a workload as one identity because the identity, your identity, Mark, is the composition, the collection of all your history, your background, your relationships, your friends, your secrets, all the things that you are. And then the way you present yourself to other entities is an identifier. You identify yourself as, something. So the question here is, does a workload have different multiple identities? I believe not, but must have many identifiers or aliases in the sense that they indeed need to present themselves differently. And they may indeed have, in each relationship, have different, what we call authorities. You may call them roles and permissions or other, access control terms. But essentially, the identity of a workload, and I think this is a very important piece, especially when we talk about agentic stuff, which we obviously talk about, is that the instance of all instances of a workload should have one identity, but should have many identifiers and/or / aliases. And so that I think is a foundational difference, foundational nuance that we need to make clear. All of us agree on. Otherwise, we're going to get tripped up by the use of the term identity.
Right. So in fact, we have somewhere, let me try and pick this up, because I want to also not have to redo all the definitions. Let me see if this document contains, there's a TWI requirement.
I think we may, so Whimsy, does Whimsy have a definition of identity, identifier?
I don't know. Well, let's pick this up. So these are requirements, so it's not going to be in here. Let me see if it's going to be in governance. No, computing. Governance.
While you're looking this up, we have complementary work where you provide reference values and endorsements to certain execution environments because you will want to measure them and want to compare them to stuff. And we have 4 types of identifying methods. I want to call them that for the sake of convenience here, in order to not say identity or identifier. It's identifying methods. You are identifying an instance with an instance identifier value. You are identifying a class with a class identifier value. Or you can identify a group, which is an arbitrary composition of instances in a device that are beyond class, but also kind of a thing, typically a product. And then there's the most weirdest thing, that's the wildcard matcher, which is like you find similar instances that are not necessarily the whole class, nor necessarily a group, which is, I think, the most horrible thing. So people try to identify these environments for remote attestation. And I want to shove the wildcard thing maybe a little bit out of scope, but the instance, the class, and the group are pretty much clear why they are necessary sometimes for, well, there's one thing you want to talk about easy. There's a class of things where you say, where you consider it 100 times, there's the same class, so therefore identifiable. And there's a group because you have a heterogeneous thing that you compose at will as a product. Sometimes maybe. So maybe the same principles can apply here. That's just an anecdotal restatement of how environments, not necessarily workloads, are identified somewhere else. Yeah.
Okay, so here are the definitions we've agreed on before. So identifier is the stable construct for relying parties. That's super important for just deployability. And then identity, as we defined it before, was the same as Whimsy. It's a three things. It's trust domain, workload identifier, and identity credential. So we could simply say that. But note that an identity can have an identifier, which is stable, right? So where I would basically say, this is where I would claim that a single workload instance may have multiple workload identities, right? Which would be combination of these three things. And we can express that in ERD. And then the workload identifier would be part of the identity, right? And there would be a one-to-one relationship between them because an identity has an identifier. And if it's a different identifier, it's a different identity. And then credential, of course, is, again, it's part of identity then, right? Because so workload identity gets you an identifier and it gets you a credential. So I'm just basically trying to figure out how, if we can capture it, you know, in a way that's readable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, could we try to avoid the term identity at all? Maybe this is just a spitballing proposal, but this is something people get hung up on a lot. And in the end, what you're doing is identifying or re-identifying, and you have identity documents or identifiers. And
Well,
then
we
there's
can't
this.
avoid using it and be and work with Whimsy,
Okay.
right? Because Whimsy is
I see.
workload identity. So okay, they will basically say so a workload identity. This is this alias for one executing workload might have multiple of these aliases, which is trust domain identifying credential. Now the credential is perhaps the identity document, right?
Probably.
Maybe it isn't. But
Credential, I mean, a credential is really an authentication method. It's like, you know, it's the key that you use to authenticate, just like in multi-factor authentication, passkeys and stuff like that. The workload is using its credential to prove something to the relying party. So it really has nothing to do with identity. It's an authentication piece. And again, Hank, it's not authenticating the end user. It's authenticating the, you know, the code that's running, the behavior of the code that's running in that execution environment. So for me, I think we do need to separate credentials from identity. But if that's how Whimsy, I mean, to me, the idea of being constrained by Whimsy is you know, rubbing me the wrong way every single time. But
yeah, I hear you. I'm just trying to figure out how we can define fewer terms. That's all.
yeah, I understand your intent. I'm just saying it's.
I wonder if we can use fewer terms or use terms that are more aligned without tying ourselves to a particular architecture, which may not be the only one.
Because Mark, I want to actually, you know, what's unique about us is that about us, the CCC, right, is that we are basically trying to abstract everything from the what we really care about are the bits that run in an execution environment. And yes, we want to bind an identifier to that thing because other code that's running in execution in TEs, right, needs to be able to connect to it. But there's no necessity because we don't have a trust domain, right? There is no inherent dependency on the domain itself in the world that confidential computing enables. To me, this is the incompatibility between the traditional Whimsy IETF domain-centric approach of things, and we are talking about identifying a behavioral, you know, a computational behavior that runs in an execution environment. And then after that, of course, for other reasons that you mentioned, we need to tie that execution environment to a physical machine, to a, you know, data center, to humans and to organizations and things like that. But essentially, if we had the same piece of code running in a trusted execution environment that is verified in some way, it doesn't matter which trust domain, which physical machine, which data center. Today, it matters because of regulations, but essentially in the future, in a fully decentralized kind of execution, you know, infrastructure, it really would not matter where this runs. And the reason why I'm pushing this is because in the discussions at NATO, for instance, it is quite important to be able to move workloads without having to know where they are. So just the opposite use case that you have with regulations is to have the most resilient computing infrastructure is to be able to deploy, a piece of code on some trusted execution environment on some machine somewhere, as long as other, workloads or instances, workload instances can connect to it. They don't want to know, or in some cases, they would not want to know, because then it doesn't leak any information whatsoever, not even the location of the workload.
Right. So I like the vision you put forth. We may get to it. It's probably one of the parallel universe futures ahead of us. I just believe we need to encompass that future and perhaps other futures. And one way we can go about this, and we can basically combine identity and identifier into sort of one thing. Because of this one-to-one relationship between identity and identifier. And then we can simply say, we can use the two terms interchangeably, but then one identifier can still have multiple credentials, if only because they're multiple lifetimes. That would also give us fewer terms to work with.
Well, it's definitely true that an instance of a workload has to have its own TLS keys, for instance, right? Or whatever. They don't necessarily need to share. In our world, they do share, but they don't necessarily need to share,
right?
Credentials to authenticate themselves to something else.
Okay, so this is what I propose we do. We just kill identifier because of the one-to-one relationship with one. If you have one, then you have the other, and they're just sort of inseparable, right? So that simplifies things. And we can basically then we can use these terms interchangeably. We can even say in Whimsy, your identity will have the trust domain and and credential, but that's probably not going to be terribly confusing, because we're basically saying you can still have multiple credential instances for an identity.
Okay, we can try to roll with that, but
if it doesn't work, we can
Yeah, we can-
revisit. I just want to hear if there are any strong objections.
There's no strong objection from Frank. But I want to highlight that other work failed on this. On the trenches dug on what is an identity. And we don't want to fail on this. So I think we have one meat shield, so to speak. That's the Whimsy working group. They can buffer some of this discussion for us. So I think hiding behind the terminology of Whimsy is a sane move, because we don't have to fight that fight on the first front. Even if it comes with lack of expressiveness, which we add by suffixing some of their terminology, which I think we do with the workload, for example, with the workload instance here. And so with the suffixing it, I think we are hiding behind the fundamental terms, and that could help us create a more detailed picture, while still don't dying on the identity identifier front. Maybe.
that's
Well, so the only hill here that I am willing to die on is the fact that identifier needs to be extra stable, or at least have a possibility of being extra stable, because otherwise your relying parties become unmanageable. But I'm still yet to see a significant difference between identity and identifier.
Yeah, so let's quickly for 1 minute. So in an identity document, which a minimal version of identity document is a signed pub key, you typically also include additional identifying values called identifiers. So that's relatively easy. If you have an identity document, it includes identifiers. That's okay.
Well, let
but
me stop you there, because I want to avoid confusion. Okay, when you say identifier, there is this id in there, as in the uniqueness, like I can uniquely identify, right? So as an identifier. So for instance, the fact that I'm a US citizen is not really an identifier, it's more of a property shared by many. So for you, that's not an identifier, is it?
It is, of course. It is.
It is.
It is like a combination of all identifiers compose the identity document. So having US in there, There's a Hank Burkholz with the same height, with the same eye color, with the same birth date, but this birth town is in the US, and my birth town is in
No,
Germany. They're
but
different Hanks.
yeah, they are. So let's get into where perhaps one identity can maybe have multiple identifiers, and this is where this would. As far as like identity, as in like who I am, that's a fairly static construct. I can have multiple identifiers. So for instance, I have a driver's license number. That's an identifier, only belongs to me.
Yes.
So there is this uniqueness. Now,
Yeah.
I still challenge that the fact that I'm a US citizen is not an identifier, it's a property. But there's one clear identifier is a driver's license number. Another clear identifier is my passport number. Another clear identifier is my social security number, right? So here I have several identifiers that are
Yeah,
well,
you're tying uniqueness. You're tying
they're
uniqueness to identifier, and I don't.
And I just simply simply the key difference between them is one can be used to identify me, and the other one is a property. And we can simply maybe
Yeah,
there
but if you accumulate enough properties, they become an identifier.
Not in a large enough set.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not. They're not identifiers, Hank.
Okay.
I agree with you that you can correlate properties, and then indeed, if the set is small enough, then you end up identifying an entity, but it's not an identifier of the entity.
Okay. So look, we're
Okay.
going to have to put one to many
Good.
with identifier because so let me just use driver's license, passport number, social security number, whatever it is in your country, social insurance number in Canada.
Yeah,
Whatever.
all these are unique identifiers. They are unique to the instance. I think that's a property of that identifier. It's uniquely identifying a single entity.
Yes.
Of
That we can agree on. The fact that collect enough things. Maybe there's another thing,
Yeah.
fingerprint. Like those are things that like uniquely identify me. And in fact, you can probably derive one from the other because they all refer to the same entity and they could be correlated.
They can be correlated. Yes, if the uniqueness exists, if you have enough correlation, you can match them. That's correct.
Right.
And the class identifiers you call properties, which is fine.
Whereas if I get many aliases, they are not correlatable. Or not necessarily
If they're
correlatable.
stable enough.
Huh?
If they're stable enough. If they're stable enough, and over time they are always the same, then I realize that foo and bar are both pointing to you. Aliases.
So with decentralized identity, the whole point is I can have multiple of, or maybe workload identity stays still the same, and I can have different identifiers. So let's not talk about that.
Exactly. That is what I think. Yes, that is correct. Like the driver's license and your social security number, different identifiers for the same identity.
But then wait.
That is why
that's fine. But if I want to avoid correlation, is there some room in this ERD for that?
room in the what? Sorry, I didn't get that.
If I want, so here I am, workload instance, executing workload instance. That's me, right? Human executing out there in the world. I may want to have multiple aliases that are not correlatable. But each one of those would be correlatable. That's what I'm trying to say. So aliases, by their nature, should not be correlatable. Otherwise, they're not aliases.
That's right. So the way we deal with that is random identifiers are aliases, or aliases are, or can, anyway, I think that I introduced the word alias. In some cases, aliases can be recorrelated. But the solution to your question, Mark, if you don't want it to be correlatable, then you need the ability to have, full entropy random identifiers that are only used in one given relationship. And so that gives you that property of not being correlatable.
Yeah, but I guess I'm saying, so if I were to create this non-correlatable identity, I should, that may come with a bunch of one or more identifiers that those things can be correlatable because they actually correspond to one alias.
Now I'm really lost, because if you created the random identifier in the first place, it's because you didn't want it to be correlatable. So to me, it is an alias.
Well, so driver's license number is random, passport number is random, social security number is random. They're all random things, but because they,
But-
through various systems associated with the same identity, they can be correlatable. Like you can
Oh,
find
I
one
see.
from the other. That's by design.
I see what you mean, but they're not. Yeah. Okay, so they are somewhat random. They're not.
So if
purely-
I have a couple of aliases, then I should be, give them identifiers that are not correlatable across aliases.
Yeah, that's not how.
I don't know how that works. Is there a solution that realizes that?
That
An
realizes
alias set of aliases, a set of aliases about the same identity that are not correlatable? How would that work? There's a solution
So
for that?
I have
Yes,
several email aliases
Yeah.
in Outlook that all deliver into the same mailbox. And so you can send to A at Outlook and B at Outlook. They all come back into my mailbox. And if you send it
but
to
now
A at if you
Yeah.
send it to A at Outlook and I respond, you get response from A. If you send it to B at Outlook, I'll respond from B. And unless you were to know out of band that they come to the same mailbox, you'd never know. Those are aliases.
Exactly, and that is the correlation, the out-of-band interaction. So I think they are still correlated, but because but interestingly, you're highlighting that A responds to A and B responds to B, which if I look at my email client, is very hard. So all aliases go to one main, and the
Well,
main
just hard, just
replies.
because you have a bad email client doesn't mean that it's
I
impossible.
know. So it's not a problem.
guys,
So I can see what you're doing.
Hank, I think what we are talking about here, and we actually implement that explicitly in the mesh, where every
Good.
identifiers between entities and in each relationship is completely different. So they are not correlatable from the remote party, but they are exclusively correlatable from the entity's perspective itself. So the workload, or the what we call the agent that creates these non-correlatable identifier for an entity, those agents are capable of correlating them back to a single identity. But anybody outside of that agent cannot, because each one of them.
Okay,
So that it's the
let-
perspective, the vantage point. The correlation is we don't want others to recorrelate them. Or of course, the entity itself knows all it. And by the way, this is an interesting segue to what I was saying earlier. The identity is indeed the collection of all these non-correlatable aliases and other identifiers that are correlatable, and all the relationships and all the credentials in each one of the relationships. To me, that is what the identity of an entity is.
So let me do this. By next meeting, I will author a document in which I will put what we have on the on these 3 lines here. And then what you can do is you can basically see how your, the scenarios you are aware of fit into that. And if you find a way in which what you're doing doesn't fit into this, is not like an instance case of this more general relationship, then this is wrong, and then we'll need to revisit it.
Okay.
Okay, and otherwise we'll say, so far it works for all the cases that we've identified. And again, pending revision, if we find a like proof from negative, find me something that doesn't fit, and that means we'll need to revisit. But for now, I think we're going to stick to that. Now, and the reason I sort of interrupted this conversation is because we have 20 minutes left. And I want to get to this TWI for rats. And again, you can review this 1-page document that basically says this is what, this is not every TWI use case, of course, but this is the one that is of interest to, an existing today's, not future, but today's enterprise. Please review that. I put the link in the chat. I want to look at this, which is another short document that all fits on 1 page. Might want to take a minute and just review what this says. But this is so that I would like rats to work for TWI.
Good.
Okay, and this document incorporates by reference our charter requirements, the enterprise use case that I just mentioned, and from the reference architecture, it incorporates effectively this picture. that I added. So you can have your workload. One option, it goes to the verifier, gives some evidence and gets back attestation results. That's your vanilla RATs. And then these attestation results can be used as a certificate request, or sorry, a credential request, maybe a CSR to a CSA that gets back a credential. The credential goes to relying party. This is where I say this gives you this extra round trip. So not good for reliability, not good for latency, but just like the verifier can follow RATs and not make a line of change. Doesn't care. The one on the right is where the workload goes to the verifier with evidence. The verifier does a credential request to the identity provider, gets back a credential, returns attestation results, including the credential, and that credential goes to the relying party. Those are the only two ways I see this working with RATs. I certainly prefer the one on the right. I also realize that we may need to support both models, but going back to here, I'm simply basically saying, look, we need RATs to handle our enterprise use case. Please tell us how to do it. I'm looking for guidance from you, Hank, like some pretty concrete guidance, given where we are mid-September, for if there is something that we can raise at IETF 124.
Yeah, we can, yes. So first of all, let's go down to the diagram. Good. Yes, we can make this an ID. We can format this and work on ID format. That is not an issue. We can present an individual ID. Individual IDs are prioritized least. So, but they are better than no ID. That's very important. So you must have an internet draft, I think, to get on the agenda currently, because it's a relatively packed working group. So that's first. So if you want to talk about it, we must make it an ID. We have meet. That's good. We have a diagram. We have two diagrams, actually. If you scroll down a little bit, we can relate a little bit, I think, to the diagrams in the CSR attestation, which includes a registration authority /CA in the workflow. Sorry, the message flow.
Are you talking about the
the
reference
message flow.
architecture? Are you talking about these diagrams here?
I am talking about the diagram you were sharing.
Attestation diagrams you were sharing. Yeah.
With the identity. Just scroll down a little bit here. And this, no, the red's, what's
This?
the red document? Yes, this. Yeah, almost. I saw it just for a blip. Yeah, there we go. So this is very, very retsy. So that's good. And they kind of, I think, look a little bit alike to the CSR attestation diagram. So that's also good, because CSR attestation happens at LAMPS, and they try to do, so you latch evidence in the CSR, certificate signing with CSR, and then they have multiple options. So they, of course, relay that in the background. So they have more like the right model, I want to say. Both are, I think, good approaches. You tie the identity provider into this, which you always need, because obviously we are doing trustworthy workload identity, so you need the identity provider, and we just go from there. So it is what you were calling it, the horrible emptiness. It's gone. We have a thing working here. Also, I think Hannes Schofenek presented at Whimsy how to tie RATs into this. Hannes Schofenek had the trustee implementation model a little bit in the back of his head. I'm not entirely sure if we have knowledge about this here in this group. Maybe we should talk about the trustee model. I'm not super familiar with it. It's an outside KMS for decrypting and encrypting workloads, which seems to be a rather typical thing that happens. It's kind of tied to the identity management. It's key management for encryption. So maybe it's the same box. I don't know. But I think just rendering this into an ID already helps to talk about it. And that is, I think, the very first step for anything to make RATs work for us, so to speak.
So here, Mark, I have a question here. The role of, can you elaborate a bit on the role of identity provider? Is it providing the identity, or it is checking the identity reported in the evidence?
So what I mean by identity provider is something like Active Directory. It's something that like manages. So what verifier manages are like reference values, right? And
Correct.
endorsements, right?
Yeah.
An identity provider manages things like, group memberships and properties of various identities. And it's sort of something that it speaks in terms of the kinds of statements expected by relying parties, right? So, Kerberos server
Registry.
might be issuing tickets, or CA might be issuing certificates, or the Whimsy, like the Spiral server in Spiffy, may be issuing credentials to an agent. So that's your identity provider. And the job of the identity provider here is to take effectively attestation results, or to take evidence, depending on which side of the diagram you look at, map it into the set of properties that relying parties like to see, and then hand that out. And then the verifier here, and I've been basically saying this for a really long time now, the verifier needs to be integrated. So, this whole notion of verifier and attestation results needs to be integrated with credential issuance, so with identity language of a deployment.
It's a registry, right? The identity provider.
It's a what? Sorry, it's a registry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a registry.
So I can see clearly third option here, Mark, where your identity provider is next to the relying party, and then the relying party receives the attestation results and says, "Hey, this is the attestation results.
You mean the
These are good."
background check model is where you basically you send the attestation results to the relying party, and
so basically what I'm saying is that the evidence, the relying party asks for an attestation from the workload, and workload does the attestation, gives the results back to the relying party. And then
the relying party goes talks to the identity provider, and
because it knows that the attestation result is good.
Yeah.
Relying party says, "Hey, these are the attestation results."
This is the
for
part
the
of the world I'm personally blind to, because in the world I live in, that just never happens. And that is because the relying party is something that says, again, that's my world, probably very, very limited and myopic, but it just says, are you a payroll application or not? Are you in Germany or not? That's all it cares about. It doesn't know about how to send anything to verify for further checks. But that's the
what I
background
mean to
check
say
model.
is that your identity provider itself can be one. Relying party can itself be your identity provider, right? It is relying on the attestation results coming from a genuine verifier, and then make a judgment. I trust this verifier.
Then it's no
to give
longer
me
okay. Let me put it this way: if you're sending attestation results to relying party, you're outside the scope of this working group, because there are no credentials involved.
Yeah, but
there's no you're not really communicating your identity. You're letting the relying party decide what your identity is based on whatever interactions it wants to have.
No, the point of identity provider here in your boxes of identity provider is to provide the credentials, right?
Well, provide credentials to the workload. And what you're
Yes.
saying is, if I send my attestation results to my relying party, and the relying party goes and figures out who I am, the relying party will establish my identity, but there is no credential being issued to the workload.
Correct.
So
you should
if you
name
guys
the box
think
as
I should,
credential provider, right? This is a credential provider box or an identity provider box?
Well, it is a credentials issuer. I don't know, maybe I should rename it.
Yeah,
that's what I call identity provider here is what issues credentials.
Yeah, so you should call it credential issuer, right?
Sure, I can do that.
It confuses because I thought you're assigning identity to the workload through an identity provider, right?
And if need be, I don't know why it's spelling. If need be, I can take this and copy it into, say, variant 3, right?
Yeah.
And I can simply say, look, under variant 3, I go to verify, get back attestation results, send attestation results to the relying party then goes to an identity provider, but there's no credential here.
Okay.
And it doesn't really, it certainly doesn't
Prettier
fit
model,
into credential issuance, but I mean, no strong objections there.
Okay.
If the background check
Yeah.
model is how we want to establish identity, it's fair.
Yeah, we cannot help you write
Um,
this in a draft, Hank and Mark. I'm happy to kind of contribute as well. So
That would be great. So maybe we need to
Yeah.
start what we did last time, another GitHub with all the scaffolding for an ID, and then we can write it up.
Yes, sounds good. A quick litmus test to the attendees. Do any of the attendees feel that a slight variation of these two variants would be more fitting to their use case? I'm looking at virtually looking at Manu and Yogesh right now. Do you feel this is basically a good template that fits your use case like rough good enough? Or would you say, no, I need a slightly different flow of information with roles here for my use case?
But so thank you for bringing this up, that we've lived more on the right than on the left, because there's another thing that's very important to us and that I hope is important to all of us here, and that's something that I think is somewhat missing from the AETF in general, is that we should the purpose of this work should be to recommend a reference implementation or reference architecture that is optimal, and then, as we said, we could degrade it to some level to give people the freedom to do whatever they want. But clearly, on the left side, you do have the workload now has more, I would say that more attack surface and more trust anchors that it needs to be aware of. What we did, the way we arrived to the right is by saying the workload can only function after it's been verified. And so there is this inherent necessity for the workload to have a relationship with the verifier. And that should be the only bootstrap relationship, if you want. And then from there, the verifier is the one that we're going to empower the workload. And then if you use that pattern, you can see that it actually can become recursive. The one on the left cannot, or it's much more complicated to become recursive. And so the minimization of attack surface and the minimization of trust is what led us to the diagram to the right. And I think that should be a principle that we embrace at the CCC, precisely because we are in search of that. Let's have the zero trust at the chip level, all the way down to the silicon, and then bootstrap everything from there. And so that's a long explanation to say that we lean very much to the right. I think there is there's other layers of things that I'd like to bring up. I presented, you guys can go back to the video, but I think for a viable, deployable system, we do see, just like we had expressed the need for sealing for an individual platform, an individual chip being able to preserve locally some awareness of workload identity. We strongly believe that if you want to be able to do authenticity, so provenance, integrity, confidentiality, and privacy, those specific 4 properties, that because you're gonna, there is no such thing today in the world with a single instance of a workload functioning. There's always going to be a cluster just for resilience, for redundancy, for performance, for scalability. Then you need kind of a sealing key that is shared across multiple instances of a workload. And that sealing key is an encryption key where each workload can then encrypt its own information. So the credential that's being passed in our world between the verifier and the workload, essentially the credential issuer and the verifier for us collapse into one, is in fact an encryption key that's passed to the workload so that the workload can retrieve its own encryption keys and then isolate its own information from everybody else. So that's a lot here. Maybe I need to write it again, but I think I did send an email to the list that tried to map our architecture to some of the work that we're doing here, and I believe that was one of the point in there. So anyway, I don't want to rush also the impose our thinking on this. But if we were to just say, let's take a practical approach to this work, not just list all the possibilities and all the scenarios, what would be the most ideal, from scalability, performance, resilience, privacy, confidentiality, and all that, then we would naturally, drift to the right. The left becomes, why would you do it? Why would you do the left if you can do the right? And Mark, I understand what you're saying is that there may be existing verifier implementations out there, but then the question becomes, what is the attack surface of those? What are the trust anchors?
So I have a very strong preference towards the right. In fact, I do not see any uses for the left except one where I work with an obstinate verifier that does the the letter of rats, but not the spirit of what I'd like it to do.
That's right. And it goes one step further, if I may abuse here, is that the relying party, at the end of the day, the relying party, we will want it to be not in the same trust domain, right? We want it to be across domains. Mark, you want to minimize your third-party risk. And so you want to be able to have a verification event that happens somewhere else. And so we need to take that into consideration too.
Yeah, so in a different trust domain, what is missing from here is effectively federation and security token service, where the workload doesn't go to the relying party directly. It goes through a bunch of intermediaries that may give it other credentials. Henk, you have your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but this is a late hand. I didn't lower it.
No,
Sometimes
okay.
Zoom does it. Yeah.
And by the way, Mark, what you just described, this federation piece, if you injected it now and said we have relying parties that exist outside the domain, you would see that it would bubble up and end up also, up the ascending chain, if you want, of the verifier and credential issuer. You would bundle that federation thing by saying you need a shared verifier at some point. And that's where we ended up with our architecture.
Yeah.
I have an alarm clock ringing behind me because it's a hotel room. So.
All right, so we are at the top of the hour. So Yogesh, help us set up the thing for the informational draft. Now we know what that's going to be. I will author the document with our ERD, and I will solicit that you put whatever scenarios you're aware of and see how it maps. And if you find something that conflicts with that ERD, then we'll need to go change the ERD. Otherwise, we'll simply say that works for us. I will also change the definitions in our charter because it defines these things, that we're probably not going to do a straight copy of Whimsy. And again, I will make that a proposal in GitHub that we can go and accept. And that should wrap it up for today.
Sounds good. Yogesh, will you ping me about the location?
Yeah.
Where?
Oh, and Hannes should probably come talk to us too. Maybe you can broker that, Henk.
I can try.
Yeah. All right.
I saw him yesterday. I missed the opportunity. But yeah, okay.
Sounds good. I'll see you guys in a week.
Hank, let's catch up sometime later today on location as well, because we have one potential option of rats, whatever you have your repo as well, right?
See you guys.
But
maybe tomorrow.
Tomorrow that's fine.
Tomorrow after quorum is good for me. See you. Bye.
Yeah, tomorrow after quorum works for me. Yeah.
Perfecto. See you then.